My name is Violet, and at 34 years old, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged in this world. That was until the phone call that changed everything. My grandmother Eleanor was sick, really sick this time, and I needed to go home. After years of keeping my distance from my father Richard, I was being pulled back into the family web I had tried so desperately to escape. As I packed my bags for Boston, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Dad's voice had been strange on the phone, calculating almost. I never imagined he was planning something that would shake the very foundation of who I thought I was. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to face a family secret that turned your world upside down. The flight from Seattle to Boston gave me too much time to think. 5 hours trapped with nothing but memories and anxiety about what awaited me at the other end. I sipped my mediocre airplane coffee and watched the clouds pass beneath us, wondering if I was making a mistake by going back. My grandmother Eleanor had been more of a mother to me than anyone else after my mom Sarah died from breast cancer, when I was just 10 years old. The pain of losing her was still raw, sometimes a wound that never quite healed properly. After Mom died, Dad threw himself into work, leaving Eleanor to pick up the pieces of my shattered childhood. Eleanor Hamilton was a force of nature. At 92, she had built an empire with my grandfather before he passed away 15 years ago. The Hamilton Hotel collection was renowned across New England for its boutique luxury experience. What started as one small hotel in downtown Boston in the 60s had grown to 12 properties scattered across the most picturesque parts of the Northeast. The flagship property, the Eleanor Boutique Hotel in Back Bay, was consistently rated among the top hotels in the country. I smiled, thinking about how grandmother taught me to fold the perfect hospital corner on bedsheets when I was 12, insisting that attention to detail separated success from failure. "People remember how you make them feel, Violet," she would say with her perfect posture and immaculate appearance. "In this business, that's everything." My relationship with my father Richard had always been complicated, but it deteriorated significantly after he married Amanda when I was 15. He was always business first, family second, but after Amanda entered our lives, I felt like I disappeared from his priorities altogether. Amanda was 20 years younger than Dad, blonde, beautiful, and determined to establish herself as the new matriarch of the Hamilton family. She succeeded in many ways, especially after giving birth to my half-sister, Stephanie. I met Stephanie when she was just hours old, a tiny pink bundle that I promised to protect and love. For a few years, I tried to be the big sister she deserved, but the growing tension between me and my father made it increasingly difficult to be present. By the time Stephanie was 5, I was leaving for college, eager to escape the cold atmosphere of what had once been my home. After graduating with my design degree, I moved across the country to Seattle, determined to build my own life away from the Hamilton name and legacy. I established my interior design business, specializing in boutique hospitality spaces, ironically building on the knowledge I had absorbed growing up around hotels. In 8 years, I had created a reputation for myself based on my own talent, not my family connections. I was proud of that independence, even if it came at the cost of distance from my family. Through it all, Eleanor and I remained close. We spoke weekly on the phone, and I flew back to see her at least twice a year, usually timing my visits when I knew my father and Amanda would be traveling. She never criticized my decision to leave, instead encouraging me to build the life that fulfilled me. "Your mother would be so proud of your spirit," she often told me, making me feel less like I was abandoning my family and more like I was honoring her memory. Now Eleanor was sick. The doctors had found an aggressive form of pneumonia dangerous at her age, and her health was declining rapidly. Despite our regular calls, she hadn't mentioned feeling ill, which made me wonder if she had been keeping it from me, or if the decline had been sudden. As the plane began its descent into Logan Airport, I took a deep breath and prepared myself to face the family dynamics I had been avoiding for years. I had a 2-week leave of absence from my business, hoping it would be enough time. The thought that this might be my last visit with Eleanor made my chest tighten with anxiety. The taxi pulled up to the imposing gates of the Hamilton estate in Brookline. The sprawling Victorian mansion had been in the family for 4 generations, a symbol of old Boston money and privilege. As a child, I had loved exploring its many rooms and hiding places. As an adult, it felt more like a beautiful museum than a home. The driver punched in the code I provided at the call box, and the ornate iron gates slowly swung open. The long driveway lined with perfectly manicured maple trees led to the main house, its gray stone exterior, and multiple chimneys just as imposing as I remembered. Fall in New England had turned the surrounding trees into a riot of oranges and reds, a stark contrast to the evergreen landscape I had grown accustomed to in the Pacific Northwest. I paid the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and stood at the bottom of the grand front steps for a moment, gathering my courage. Before I could ring the bell, the heavy wooden door swung open. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Amanda stood in this doorway, her blonde hair cut in an elegant bob, diamond studs glittering in her ears. At 50, she still maintained the figure and appearance of someone a decade younger, thanks to what I suspected was regular cosmetic intervention. Hello, Amanda. Thank you for having me. I kept my voice neutral, determined not to start an argument within seconds of arriving. It's not like we had a choice, did we? She stepped aside to let me enter. Your grandmother has been asking for you. The foyer was just as grand as I remembered, with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. Family portraits lined the walls, chronicling generations of Hamiltons. I noticed a new large family portrait hanging in the most prominent position featuring Richard, Amanda, and Stephanie. I was conspicuously absent. Violet. My father appeared from his study, drink in hand, despite it being barely noon. Richard Hamilton, at 62, looked every bit the successful businessman in his tailored shirt and slack silver hair, perfectly styled. The years had added lines around his eyes and mouth, making him look distinguished rather than old. You made good time. Hi, Dad. I accepted his stiff one-armed hug, inhaling the familiar scent of expensive cologne and whiskey. You look thin, he commented, stepping back to assess me. West Coast living not agreeing with you. Before I could respond, Stephanie came bounding down the stairs. At 19, she was the spitting image of Amanda, with the same blonde hair and delicate features. She was dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Violet, you actually came. Her tone contained surprise that might have been insulting if I hadn't been so happy to see a somewhat friendly face. Of course I did, Steph. How could I not? I gave her a genuine hug, relieved when she returned it with seeming sincerity. How's school going? Still pre-law. Yes, and acing all my classes. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. Harvard is exactly where I belong. Your grandmother is resting now, Richard interjected, but she's been asking for you. You can see her when she wakes up. Martha will show you to your room. I assume you remember Martha. Of course I do. Martha had been the housekeeper for as long as I could remember, practically raising me after my mother died. It will be good to see her. As if summoned by her name, Martha appeared at the top of the stairs, her round face breaking into a warm smile when she saw me. Miss Violet, oh, it's so good to have you home. Home. The word felt strange. This house hadn't felt like home for a very long time. After settling into my old room, which had been redecorated into an impersonal guest suite since my departure, I couldn't wait any longer to see my grandmother. Martha informed me that Eleanor was awake and asking for me, so I made my way to the master suite on the second floor. The room was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Medical equipment surrounded the large four-poster bed where Eleanor lay propped up on pillows. Despite the circumstances, she was impeccably groomed, her silver hair styled a touch of blush on her cheeks, and wearing one of her favorite silk bed jackets. There you are, my darling girl. Her voice was weaker than I remembered, but her blue eyes, so like my own, lit up at the sight of me. Come closer so these old eyes can see you properly. I sat carefully on the edge of the bed and took her fragile hand in mine. Her skin felt like tissue paper, the veins prominent beneath the surface. I came as soon as I heard Grandma. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? Because you would have worried, and I hate to be the cause of worry. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Besides, it happened rather suddenly. One day I was fine, the next I couldn't catch my breath. What are the doctors saying? I asked, trying to keep the fear from my voice. That I'm 92 years old and pneumonia is serious at my age. She smiled wryly. But I'm not ready to go just yet. There are matters I need to settle first. Don't talk like that, I protested, but she waved away my concern. Violet, at my age, one must be practical about these things. I've had a good long life, and when the time comes, I'll be ready. But first, we need to talk about the future. She lowered her voice. I've updated my will. My stomach dropped. Grandma, I didn't come here to talk about your will or inheritance. I came because I love you. I know that, darling. That's precisely why we need to discuss it. Richard has been making some concerning decisions regarding the company. She glanced toward the door as if worried about being overheard. I want to make sure you're properly taken care of. You're so much like me, you know, more than anyone else in this family. It was true. I had inherited not only Eleanor's blue eyes and dark hair, but also her determination and eye for detail. We shared a connection that went beyond grandmother and granddaughter. In many ways, she understood me better than anyone. Richard won't be happy about some of the changes I've made, she continued, but it's my company, and I'll decide what happens to it when I'm gone. Before she could elaborate, there was a knock at the door and a nurse entered with medication. Our private conversation was cut short, but Eleanor gave my hand one last meaningful squeeze. We'll talk more later, she whispered. Don't worry about your father. I've made arrangements. That evening, a tense family dinner was served in the formal dining room. Richard sat at the head of the table with Amanda to his right and Stephanie beside her. I took my place to his left, feeling like an outsider at what had once been my family table. Martha served poached salmon with seasonal vegetables, a favorite of Eleanor's, that Richard had insisted on serving in her honor, though she was too ill to join us. The conversation was strained, revolving around safe topics like Stephanie's studies and local Boston gossip. How is the business going these days? I finally asked, breaking the unspoken rule of not discussing the family company. Richard's jaw tightened. It's going fine. We've had to make some adjustments given the current economic climate, but the Hamilton name still carries weight. What kind of adjustments? I pressed, genuinely curious. I had followed the hospitality industry closely given my line of work, and knew many boutique hotels were struggling against the chains and the rise of short-term rentals. Nothing that would interest you, Richard replied dismissively. You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with the family business when you ran off to Seattle. I didn't run off, Dad. I started my own career. Playing with wallpaper samples and throw pillows, Amanda interjected with a smirk, while the rest of us have been here managing actual business affairs. I bit back a sharp retort, reminding myself that I was here for Eleanor, not to rehash old arguments. My design firm is doing very well, actually. We just finished a project for the Archer Hotel chain that's been featured in several design publications. That's amazing, Violet, Stephanie said, seeming genuinely impressed. Yes, well done, Richard said without enthusiasm. But it's hardly comparable to running a multi-property hotel chain that's been in the family for generations. A chain that Grandma and Grandpa built, I reminded him, and that Grandma still technically owns. Richard's face darkened. Your grandmother may own the majority share, but I've been running day-to-day operations for 20 years. I think I understand what's best for the company. And what exactly do you think is best, Dad? Because from what I've heard, there might be some financial issues happening. The silence that fell over the table was deafening. Richard's knuckles turned white around his fork, and Amanda shot me a venomous glare. And where exactly did you hear that? Richard asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I immediately regretted my impulsive question. Just general industry talk. The boutique market is challenging right now for everyone. Well, you heard wrong, Richard snapped. And I would appreciate it if you wouldn't spread unfounded rumors about our company based on your limited understanding of the business world. I didn't mean to offend. I backtracked, wondering where my information had actually come from. Had Eleanor mentioned something during our calls that I had forgotten? You've always been quick to criticize my management. Richard continued, his temper rising. Even though you've contributed absolutely nothing to the company's success, you abandoned your heritage to go play artist on the West Coast. Richard, please. Amanda placed a hand on his arm, her eyes darting to Stephanie, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. No, It needs to be said, Richard insisted. Violet comes back after years of absence and immediately starts questioning my business decisions. Based on what some industry gossip, you know nothing about what it takes to preserve a legacy, Violet. You've always been too self-absorbed to see beyond your own desires. That's not fair, I protested, feeling like I was 15 again, constantly disappointing my father. I built my own business because you never showed any interest in including me in the family one. You made it clear Stephanie was the heir apparent from the day she was born. Because Stephanie understands loyalty and family obligation, Richard retorted. She doesn't run away when things get difficult. The implication that I had abandoned my family stung, especially when I had spent years trying to maintain a relationship with Eleanor, despite the tension with my father. I think I've lost my appetite, I said, placing my napkin beside my barely touched plate. If you'll excuse me. I left the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, retreating to the garden terrace, where I had spent so many afternoons with my mother as a child. The autumn air was crisp, but I welcomed the chill needing to clear my head. What had started as concern for my grandmother was turning into something else. Richard's defensive reaction to my innocent question about the business seemed overblown. What was he hiding? And what had Eleanor meant about concerning decisions and making arrangements? Something wasn't right in the Hamilton household, and I was beginning to suspect my impromptu visit had interrupted plans that had been in motion long before my arrival. The next morning, I woke early, the time difference working in my favor. The house was quiet as I made my way downstairs to the kitchen, hoping to grab a cup of coffee before anyone else was up. To my surprise, I found the kitchen lights already on and heard voices coming from the adjacent breakfast room. We need to move quickly. My father's voice drifted through the partially open door. She's not going to hold on much longer, and we need to make sure everything is in place before that happens. What about Violet? Amanda asked. Her being here complicates things. Violet is a temporary problem. Once Mother is gone, we can deal with her. The coldness in my father's voice sent a chill down my spine. The important thing is making sure Mother updates the will before it's too late. But Thomas said she's been resistant to the changes you suggested, Amanda said, referring to Thomas Wilson, the family's longtime attorney. Thomas works for me, Richard replied firmly, and he'll do what I tell him to do. Mother trusts him, which works in our favor. If he suggests the changes are for the best, she'll listen. And if she doesn't, she will, Richard insisted. She has to. With the company's current financial situation, we can't afford to have the shares split. Everything needs to come to me so I can make the necessary decisions without interference. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. What exactly was the current financial situation my father had denied at dinner? And what changes was he trying to convince Eleanor to make to her will? My curiosity piqued. I decided to do some investigating while the house was still quiet. I slipped into my father's study feeling like an intruder, but determined to understand what was happening. The large mahogany desk was cluttered with papers unusual for my normally fastidious father. I quickly scanned the documents, finding financial reports for the hotel chain. The numbers weren't good. Occupancy rates were down across all properties, and expenses had increased significantly. Several of the smaller properties were operating at a loss. Even more concerning were bank statements showing personal loans my father had taken out using company assets as collateral. The amounts were staggering millions of dollars that didn't seem to have been reinvested in the business. As I was examining a particularly troubling document showing a missed loan payment, the study door opened. I looked up startled, expecting to see my father's angry face. Instead, I found myself looking at Thomas Wilson. Thomas had been the Hamilton family attorney for as long as I could remember, a distinguished man, now in his late 60s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had always been friendly to me, sneaking me peppermints from his pocket during boring family meetings when I was a child. Violet, he said, surprise evident in his voice. I didn't expect to find you here. I straightened up, not bothering to hide the papers I'd been examining. Hello, Thomas. I was just trying to understand what's happening with the company. Dad hasn't been forthcoming. Thomas glanced at the documents in my hand, then closed the study door behind him. Your father wouldn't be pleased to find you going through his papers. I imagine not, I agreed, especially since they contradict everything you told me at dinner last night about the business doing fine. Thomas sighed, removing his glasses to clean them with his handkerchief, a habit I remembered from childhood. The situation is complicated, Violet. How complicated is the company in danger of bankruptcy? Not yet, Thomas said carefully. But there have been some concerning financial decisions made in recent years. By my father, I clarified. Thomas nodded reluctantly. Your grandmother has become aware of some of these issues, which is why she asked me to update her will recently. My heart skipped a beat. And what changes did she want to make? I can't discuss the specifics of your grandmother's will with you, Violet. You know that. I overheard my father talking about pressuring Grandma to make changes that would benefit him. Is that what's happening, Thomas? Is he trying to gain control of everything? Thomas looked uncomfortable. Your father has his own ideas about what would be best for the company moving forward. Ideas that my grandmother doesn't share. Your grandmother is concerned about preserving the company's legacy and ensuring all family members are treated fairly, Thomas said diplomatically. Why don't you come by my office tomorrow? Perhaps we can speak more freely there. Before I could respond, the study door opened again, and Stephanie stood in the doorway. Her expression hardened when she saw me with the financial documents. What are you doing in Dad's study? She demanded. Just catching up with Thomas, I said, attempting to sound casual as I placed the papers back on the desk. With Dad's private financial records. Stephanie entered the room. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. I knew it! You're only here because you think Grandma is going to die and leave you money. That's not true, I protested. I'm here because I care about Grandma. Right. Stephanie scoffed. That's why you've been away for years, only calling when it's convenient for you. Meanwhile, we've been here taking care of her and the family business. Stephanie, Thomas interjected, this isn't productive. Your sister is concerned about family matters as anyone would be. Half-sister, Stephanie corrected coldly, and she stopped being concerned about this family when she ran away to Seattle. The venom in her voice caught me off guard. The little sister who had once followed me around adoringly had clearly been influenced by years of Richard and Amanda's narrative about my departure. I didn't run away, Stephanie. I built my own life and career. That doesn't mean I stopped caring about Grandma or even about you. Save it, Stephanie snapped. Dad told me how you abandoned us when things got tough, how you couldn't handle the responsibility of being part of this family. And now you show up when Grandma is dying and start snooping through financial records. It's pretty obvious what you're after. It's not like that. I tried again, hurt by her accusations. I'm worried about Grandma and about what's happening to the company she and Grandpa built. Dad's making decisions that could jeopardize everything. Dad has kept this company afloat, while you've been playing with fabric swatches 3,000 miles away, Stephanie retorted. You don't get to waltz back in and start criticizing him now. Perhaps this discussion can continue later, Thomas suggested firmly. Stephanie, I believe your father was looking for you. And Violet, don't forget my invitation for tomorrow. Stephanie gave me one last suspicious look before turning to leave. I'm watching you, Violet. Don't think you can come back and manipulate Grandma when she's vulnerable. After she left, Thomas gave me a sympathetic look. Family dynamics can be challenging, especially during difficult times. Try not to take her words to heart. She's been poisoned against me, I said sadly. They all have. Not everyone, Thomas replied meaningfully. Your grandmother has always seen things clearly. Remember that. As Thomas left, I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor was being isolated from outside influence. When I had arrived yesterday, I'd been told I couldn't see her until she woke from a nap. This morning, I'd been informed by Martha that the doctor was with her, and she couldn't have visitors. Who was controlling access to my grandmother? And what else were they controlling? As I was leaving the study, I noticed a business card that had fallen to the floor. Picking it up, I saw it belonged to Dr. James Fraser, MD, with a specialization in geriatric care. This must be Eleanor's doctor. I pocketed the card thinking it might be useful to speak with him directly about my grandmother's condition. The more I discovered, the more concerned I became that there was something much darker happening in the Hamilton household than just a family disagreement over inheritance. That afternoon, I decided to try to see my grandmother again, only to be told by Amanda that she was resting and couldn't be disturbed. Frustrated, I went for a walk around the grounds to clear my head. When I returned to the house, I heard voices coming from Richard's study once again. Recognizing one as belonging to Dr. Fraser from his distinctive Scottish accent, I paused outside the door to listen. She's stable for now, but at her age, things can change rapidly, the doctor was saying. The pneumonia is responding to the antibiotics, but she remains weak. What about the medication for her anxiety? Richard asked. Accused. She seems very agitated when discussing business matters. I've prescribed a mild sedative, but I'm hesitant to increase the dosage, Dr. Fraser replied. Too much could affect her mental clarity, and at this stage, maintaining cognitive function is important for her quality of life. Doctor, my mother is 92 and suffering from pneumonia, Richard said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone I recognized from childhood. Her comfort should be our primary concern. If discussing business matters agitates her, perhaps a stronger sedative is warranted to help her rest. Mr. Hamilton, while I appreciate your concern for your mother's comfort, I have to consider the overall medical picture. Increasing sedation could potentially worsen her condition. I understand, but I'm watching my mother suffer with anxiety on top of everything else, Richard insisted. Surely there's something more you can prescribe to keep her calm, especially when she has visitors who might upset her. The implication was clear. Richard wanted Eleanor sedated, particularly when I was around. The realization made my blood boil. I knocked loudly on the door before entering without waiting for a response. Dad, Dr. Fraser. I greeted them, noting my father's momentary look of alarm. I was hoping to speak with the doctor about Grandma's condition. We were just concluding our discussion, Richard said stiffly. Dr. Fraser was updating me on Mother's progress. I'd love to hear that update as well, I said, turning to the doctor, a kind-looking man in his 50s. I'm Violet Eleanor's granddaughter. Yes, Mrs. Hamilton has mentioned you often, Dr. Fraser said with a smile. She's been looking forward to your visit. Has she? That's interesting because I've barely been allowed to see her since I arrived, I said pointedly. Your grandmother needs rest, Violet, Richard interjected. The doctor has been very clear about limiting visitors. Actually, Dr. Fraser said, short, pleasant visits can be quite beneficial for patients' mental well-being, as long as they're not overly taxing, of course. See, I'm not going to tire her out, Dad. I just want to spend time with her. I turned back to the doctor. I also wanted to ask about her medication. I couldn't help overhearing something about sedatives. Richard's face darkened. This is a private medical discussion, Violet. It's inappropriate for you to eavesdrop and then interject yourself. It's not inappropriate if you're trying to have my grandmother unnecessarily sedated. I shot back, my temper finally breaking through, especially if it's to prevent her from talking to me about the company or her will. How dare you? Richard's voice rose as he stood from his desk. I'm trying to make my mother comfortable in what could be her final days, and you're accusing me of drugging her for financial gain? I don't know, Dad. Are you, because from what I've seen of the company finances and heard about your attempts to change her, it certainly seems suspicious. You know nothing about the company finances or my mother's will, Richard snarled. You gave up any right to that information when you abandoned this family. I didn't abandon anyone. I moved away and built my own life, which is a normal thing for an adult to do. But Grandma is still important to me, and I'm not going to stand by while you manipulate her when she's vulnerable. Manipulate her? I've spent the last decade caring for her while you've been on the other side of the country. Richard was shouting now, his face red with anger. Perhaps I should leave you to discuss family matters, Dr. Fraser interjected awkwardly. No, please stay, doctor, I insisted. I'd like to know exactly what medications my grandmother is being given and why. This is outrageous, Richard fumed. You have no legal right to that information. Maybe not, but if I suspect elder abuse, I can certainly involve authorities who do have that right. I threatened, though. I wasn't sure if I actually could. Elder abuse. Richard's voice dropped dangerously low. You think I would harm my own mother after everything I've done for this family? I think you'd do anything to get control of the company, I said, standing my ground, even if it means keeping Grandma sedated until she signs whatever documents you put in front of her. You ungrateful, conniving little... Richard stopped himself, taking a deep breath. Dr. Fraser, would you excuse us? My daughter and I need to have a private conversation. The doctor looked between us uncertainly. Perhaps it would be best if I check on Mrs. Hamilton now. She should be awake from her nap. I'll come with you, I said quickly, not wanting to be alone with my father in his current state. You'll do no such thing. Richard grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. We're going to settle this now. Take your hand off me, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Richard, please. Dr. Fraser stepped forward, clearly concerned by the escalating tension. This isn't helping anyone, least of all your mother. The commotion had drawn Amanda and Stephanie to the study doorway, both looking alarmed at the scene before them. What's going on? Amanda demanded. Violet is accusing me of drugging Mother to manipulate her will, Richard said, releasing my arm but still vibrating with anger. That's insane, Stephanie exclaimed. Dad would never do something like that. Then why is he asking the doctor to increase her sedatives right before a meeting with the family attorney? I challenged. And why have I barely been allowed to see her since I arrived? Because you upset her, Amanda said coldly. Every time you visited in the past, she's been agitated afterward, talking about changes to the company and the will. Changes that obviously don't benefit you, I retorted. This family has done fine without you for years, Amanda said. We don't need you swooping in now to stir up trouble. This family has done so well that the company is practically bankrupt due to Dad's mismanagement and personal loans. I shot back. A heavy silence fell over the room. Dr. Fraser looked deeply uncomfortable, caught in the middle of a family drama he hadn't signed up for. I should really check on Mrs. Hamilton, he said, edging toward the door. I'm coming with you, I insisted, moving past my stunned family members. Violet, Richard called after me, his voice suddenly different, almost desperate. You don't understand what you're talking about. The company has had some temporary setbacks, that's all. Temporary setbacks don't explain millions in personal loans using company assets as collateral, I replied without turning around. What happened to that money, Dad? Where did it go? You have no right to question me about the business. Richard's anger returned full force. You're not even a real Hamilton. The words hung in the air, shocking everyone into silence, including Richard himself, who seemed surprised by what he'd just blurted out. What did you just say? I turned slowly to face him. Richard's expression hardened as he apparently decided to commit to what he'd started. You heard me. You're not my biological daughter. Your mother was having an affair before you were born. I only found out years later, but I raised you as my own out of respect for Sarah. I felt like I'd been slapped. You're lying. Mom would never have cheated on you. Believe what you want? Richard shrugged, a cruel smile forming on his lips. But it's the truth. I have proof. DNA doesn't lie, Violet. You're not a Hamilton by blood, which means you have no claim to this family or its fortune. Richard, Amanda whispered, looking shocked even as she placed a supportive hand on his arm. Stephanie stared at me with wide eyes, her previous anger replaced by confusion. That's why I've been trying to update Mother's will, Richard continued, seemingly emboldened by the stunned silence, to ensure that the company stays with true Hamilton blood. Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune, not some outsider who happens to share my last name on paper. The viciousness of his words cut deep. Was this really how he had seen me all these years? As an imposter in the family. It would explain his emotional distance, his preference for Stephanie, his resentment when I refused to fade quietly into the background. If that's true, I managed to say despite the lump in my throat, why didn't you tell me years ago? What good would it have done? Sarah was gone and Mother adored you. I did what was expected of me. His voice was cold, detached. But now, with Mother's health failing and the company at stake, the truth needs to come out. You're not entitled to the Hamilton legacy, Violet. You never were. I looked at Dr. Fraser, who was watching the scene with professional detachment, but unmistakable sympathy in his eyes. Then to Amanda, whose expression revealed she had known this truth for some time. Finally to Stephanie, who looked genuinely shocked and confused. I don't believe you, I said finally. And neither will Grandma. Mother knows, Richard claimed. I told her years ago. Why do you think she's been so insistent on seeing you before she dies? She feels guilty for keeping the secret. This didn't align with anything Eleanor had ever said to me, but doubt began to creep in. Was it possible? Could my entire identity be built on a lie? I need to speak with Grandma, I said, turning to follow Dr. Fraser, who was still waiting awkwardly by the door. Alone. You can try, Richard said, his voice suddenly weary, but she's been slipping in and out of lucidity. She might not even recognize you today. The implication was clear. Whatever Eleanor might say could be dismissed as confusion or medication-induced delirium. Richard had created the perfect scenario to discredit any contradiction of his story. As I followed Dr. Fraser upstairs, my mind raced. Was my father telling the truth about my parentage? Or was this an elaborate lie to cut me out of my inheritance? Either way, I needed answers, and I knew I couldn't trust anyone in this house to provide them. The revelation about my supposed parentage left me reeling. After a brief visit with my grandmother, who was indeed sedated and barely coherent, I retreated to my room to process everything that had happened. I needed to speak with someone who knew my mother, someone who might be able to confirm or deny Richard's shocking claim. Jane Porter had been my mother's best friend since college. They had remained close until Mom's death, and Jane had been like an aunt to me growing up. She still lived in Cambridge, about 30 minutes from the Hamilton estate. I found her number in my contacts and called her immediately. "Violet, sweetheart." "What a wonderful surprise," Jane answered, her warm voice instantly comforting. "Are you in Boston?" "I heard Eleanor wasn't well." "I am, and I need to see you, Jane. It's important. Can I come over tomorrow?" "Of course, darling. Is everything all right? You sound upset." "I'll explain everything when I see you. It's complicated." Jane agreed to meet me for lunch the following day. After hanging up, I decided to follow through with my plan to visit Thomas Wilson at his office as well. If anyone knew the truth about the Hamilton family's secrets, it would be the longtime family attorney. The next morning, I managed to slip out of the house early, avoiding any further confrontations with my father or Amanda. I drove the familiar route to Thomas's downtown office in a rental car, my mind still churning with questions and doubts. Thomas welcomed me into his elegant office overlooking the Boston Common, offering me tea as we sat in the comfortable seating area rather than across his imposing desk. "I've been expecting you," he said, settling into a leather armchair, "especially after yesterday's revelation." "So you've heard already?" I wasn't surprised. Richard would have wanted his attorney prepared for any legal challenges I might bring. "Your father called me last night," Thomas confirmed. "He was concerned you might contest your grandmother's will based on his disclosure about your parentage." "Is it true?" I asked directly. "Do you know if I'm really not Richard's biological daughter?" Thomas sighed, removing his glasses in that familiar gesture. "Violet, I've been the Hamilton family attorney for over 40 years. I knew your mother well. Sarah was a kind, principled woman who adored your father." "That's not an answer," I pointed out. "No, it's not," Thomas agreed. "Because the truth is, I don't know for certain. Your father never mentioned any doubts about your paternity until after your mother passed away, when he couldn't be contradicted. And even then, it was only in private, never in any legal context." "What about Grandma's will? Is he trying to change it to exclude me?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "I can't discuss the specifics of Eleanor's will with you while she's still alive, Violet. But I can tell you that she has been very clear about her wishes, and she's of sound mind when making them, despite what your father might suggest." "Is she leaving me something that Dad doesn't want me to have?" I pressed. "Your grandmother cares deeply about you and about the company she and your grandfather built," Thomas said carefully. "She wants to ensure both are protected." "From my father," I concluded. Thomas didn't confirm or deny, but his expression told me I was right. "Your father has been making some concerning business decisions in recent years, decisions that Eleanor doesn't fully support, like taking out personal loans using company assets as collateral." Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've been doing your homework." "I found some documents in Dad's study. The company isn't doing well, is it? The Hamilton Hotel collection has faced challenges, as has much of the hospitality industry. But some of those challenges have been exacerbated by certain management decisions." My father's been running the company into the ground. I translated his diplomatic phrasing. And now he's desperate to get control of Grandma's shares before she can stop him or leave them to me. That would be one interpretation of events, Thomas acknowledged. And this sudden revelation about my parentage, that's just a convenient way to try to cut me out of any inheritance. I can't speak to your father's motivations, Violet, but the timing is certainly interesting. Has he provided any proof of this claim? DNA tests? Letters? Anything concrete? Not to my knowledge, Thomas admitted, though he claims to have evidence. Convenient evidence that appears right when Grandma is too sick to contradict him, I said bitterly. If you're concerned about the validity of your father's claims, there are ways to verify paternity, Thomas suggested gently. DNA testing is quite advanced these days. And how would I get a sample from Richard for comparison? He's hardly likely to cooperate. Thomas smiled slightly. Leave that to me. If you're serious about wanting to know the truth, I can help facilitate the testing discreetly. Why would you do that? I asked Sipavishua suspiciously. You work for my father. I work for the Hamilton family, Thomas corrected, and I've known you since you were a little girl hiding under my desk during meetings. More importantly, I made a promise to your grandmother to ensure her wishes are carried out regardless of pressure from any other family members. I studied him carefully, trying to determine if I could trust him. Something in his steady gaze reminded me of the man who had always slipped me peppermints and winked conspiratorially during boring family discussions. Okay, I decided. Let's do the DNA test. In the meantime, I'm meeting with my mother's best friend today. If anyone would know if Mom was having an affair, it would be Jane. A sensible approach. Thomas nodded approvingly. Gather all the facts before deciding how to proceed. Very much like your grandmother. As I left Thomas's office, I felt slightly better, having an ally in this increasingly complicated situation. But I still had more questions than answers, and time was running out as Eleanor's condition continued to deteriorate. My lunch with Jane proved even more illuminating. We met at a small cafe near her Cambridge home, and the moment she saw my face, she enveloped me in a warm hug. "Oh, sweetheart, you look so much like Sarah," she said, pulling back to study my face. "Those same blue eyes. She'd be so proud of the woman you've become." Once we were settled with our meals, I dove straight into the reason for my visit. "Jane, I need to ask you something important about Mom. Dad told me yesterday that he's not my biological father, that Mom was having an affair before I was born. Is that possible?" Jane's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, her eyes widening in shock. "He said what? That I'm not his biological daughter, that Mom cheated on him." Jane set her cup down with such force that coffee sloshed over the rim. "That is absolutely outrageous. Your mother would never, ever have been unfaithful to Richard. She adored that man, God knows why." "You're sure?" I pressed, desperate for confirmation. "Violet, I was Sarah's best friend for 20 years. We told each other everything. If she'd been having an affair, I would have known." Jane reached across the table to grasp my hand. "Your mother was the most honest, loyal person I've ever known. Richard's claim is not just false, it's a disgusting insult to her memory." Relief flooded through me, though a small seed of doubt remained. Why would he say it then? Why now? I can't begin to understand Richard's motivations, but I've never trusted him, especially after how quickly he moved on after Sarah died. Jane said bitterly. "Is Eleanor's health worse? Could this have something to do with inheritance?" "Grandma is very ill," I confirmed. "And yes, I think that's exactly what it's about. Dad's trying to exclude me from inheriting anything." "That sounds like Richard." Jane shook her head in disgust. "Always about the money with him, never about family or love or any of the things Sarah valued." "I need to find proof," I said. "I'm doing a DNA test, but I want to see if there's any other evidence from around the time I was born." "Well, I might be able to help with that," Jane said, her expression brightening. "I have boxes of photos and letters from Sarah in my attic. We wrote to each other constantly in those days before email and texting. And I was there when you were born. Did you know that you were—" This was news to me. "Oh, yes. I was Sarah's birth coach because Richard was stuck in New York on business. He barely made it back in time for the delivery." Jane smiled at the memory. "He did make it, though. and I've never seen a man cry so hard as when he held you for the first time. He was the one who cut the umbilical cord, the nurse had to show him where to cut because his hands were shaking so badly. The image she painted didn't align with the cold, calculating man who had declared me a non-blood relative just yesterday. Are you sure it was Dad, not the doctor, or someone else? Absolutely positive. I have pictures somewhere of Richard holding you in the delivery room, looking absolutely terrified and completely in love all at once. He may have changed over the years, Violet, but when you were born, that man was every inch a proud, emotional father. Do you still have those pictures? I asked eagerly. They'll be in one of the photo albums. I can look for them tonight, Jane promised. But there's someone else who might help too. Dr. Maxwell delivered you, and he's still practicing at Mass General. Semi-retired but still sees some patients. He'd remember Richard being there. Armed with these leads and Jane's unwavering certainty about my mother's fidelity, I felt more confident. Richard's claim was looking increasingly like a desperate ploy to disinherit me rather than a long-hidden truth. As I drove back to the Hamilton estate, I decided to make one more stop. Using the contact information from the business card I'd pocketed, I located Dr. Fraser's private practice office. I needed to speak with him about Eleanor's condition without my father's interference. The receptionist informed me that Dr. Fraser was with a patient, but would be available in about 20 minutes. I waited, flipping through outdated magazines without absorbing any of the content, my mind preoccupied with strategies and next steps. When Dr. Fraser emerged from his office, he looked surprised, but not displeased to see me. Miss Hamilton, this is unexpected. I need to speak with you about my grandmother, I said. Privately. He nodded, gesturing for me to follow him into his office. Once the door was closed, he took a seat behind his desk, indicating for me to sit in the patient chair. I assume this is about your father's request to increase your grandmother's sedation, he said directly. Partly, I admitted. I'm concerned that he's trying to keep her medicated to prevent her from making clear decisions about her estate. Dr. Fraser nodded thoughtfully. I had similar concerns, which is why I've been resistant to his suggestions. Your grandmother's mental faculties are still quite sharp when she's not sedated despite her physical decline. And the sedation she is receiving now is that medically necessary. For comfort, yes, but at minimal doses. Dr. Fraser leaned forward. Miss Hamilton, I take my ethical responsibilities very seriously. I would not compromise a patient's autonomy at a family member's request, no matter how insistent they might be. Thank you, I said sincerely. That's reassuring. Can I ask you something else about my birth? The question clearly caught him off guard. Your birth, I'm afraid I wasn't your mother's physician. No, but you're a doctor. If a man had suspicions about whether he was a child's biological father, would those doubts typically emerge at the birth? Would there be signs he would notice? Not necessarily, Dr. Fraser said carefully. Unless there were obvious physical characteristics that differed significantly from both parents, most men wouldn't question paternity at birth, especially if they had no reason to suspect infidelity. And cutting the umbilical cord, would a man who doubted his paternity volunteer for that? Dr. Fraser smiled slightly. In my experience, men who cut the cord are usually the ones most emotionally invested in claiming their role as father. It's a symbolic act of connection. That's what I thought. I nodded, feeling increasingly confident that Richard's claim was fabricated. One more question. If my grandmother wanted to see her attorney without my father present, would her current condition allow for that kind of meeting? From a medical perspective, yes, absolutely, Dr. Fraser confirmed. Mrs. Hamilton has periods of complete lucidity, especially in the mornings when the medications have worn off overnight. A meeting with her attorney would be entirely appropriate if she wishes it. Armed with this information and a growing determination, I thanked Dr. Fraser and headed back to the Hamilton estate. It was time to stop reacting to Richard's manipulations and start taking control of the situation myself. The next morning, I woke up early and headed straight to Eleanor's room, timing my visit before her scheduled medication. As I had hoped, she was awake and alert, sitting up against her pillows with a cup of tea. "Violet, darling," she greeted me warmly. "Come sit with me. We haven't had a proper chance to talk since you arrived." I sat on the edge of the bed, taking her fragile hand in mine. How are you feeling today, Grandma? Like a 92-year-old woman with pneumonia, she replied with a wry smile. But better than yesterday. My mind is clearer this morning. Good, because we need to talk. I lowered my voice, glancing at the door to ensure we were truly alone. Dad told me something yesterday that I need to ask you about. He said I'm not his biological daughter, that Mom had an affair. Is that true? Eleanor's blue eyes widened in shock. He said what? That I'm not his biological daughter, I repeated. That I have no blood claim to the Hamilton family. That's absolute nonsense, Eleanor declared firmly. Your mother was devoted to Richard, and you, my dear, are a Hamilton through and through. You have my eyes, my father's chin, and your grandfather's stubborn determination. Relief washed over me. So Dad is lying. Completely, Eleanor confirmed. And I can guess why. He's worried about my will, isn't he? I nodded. I think so. I've seen some of the company financial records. Things aren't good, are they? Eleanor sighed heavily. No, they're not. Richard has made some unwise investments in recent years, taking risks with the company that neither your grandfather nor I would have approved. He's borrowed heavily using company assets as collateral for personal loans. What happened to the money? Some went into risky real estate ventures that failed. Some into that ridiculous yacht he bought 2 years ago. And a fair amount, I suspect, has gone to maintaining Amanda's expensive tastes. Eleanor's disapproval was clear. I've been trying to rein him in, but as my health has declined, he's become more bold in his decisions. Is that why you updated your will recently? Yes, Eleanor confirmed. Thomas and I have been making changes to protect the company and to ensure you receive your fair share. Richard won't be happy about it, which I suspect is why he's suddenly questioning your paternity. He's been trying to keep me from seeing you, I told her, and he asked Dr. Fraser to increase your sedation. Anger flashed in Eleanor's eyes. Did he now? Well, that explains why I've been feeling so foggy the past few days. She reached for the call button beside her bed. Martha will be here soon with my morning medications. I won't be taking the sedative today. And I'd like you to call Thomas and ask him to come over immediately. It's time we settled this matter once and for all. Within an hour, Thomas Wilson had arrived at the estate with the updated will documents. Eleanor, now fully alert and determined, signed them in the presence of witnesses that Thomas had brought along independent parties with no connection to the family. There, she said as she completed the final signature. Now it's official regardless of what happens next. What exactly does the will say? I asked Thomas. Your grandmother has left 70% of her shares in Hamilton Hotels to you, Violet, with the remaining 30% going to Stephanie, Thomas explained. Richard will receive a monthly stipend from the company profits, but will have no controlling interest or management authority. He'll fight this, I warned. Let him try, Eleanor said firmly. The will is ironclad signed while I'm of sound mind with independent witnesses. And if he continues with this absurd claim about your parentage, we now have this. She handed me an envelope that Martha had retrieved from Eleanor's personal safe. Inside was a birth certificate, hospital records, and several photographs from the day I was born. Just as Jane had described, there was Richard looking young and overwhelmed, cutting my umbilical cord with tears streaming down his face. I kept these all these years, Eleanor explained. Sarah gave me copies of everything. She was so proud. And Richard was besotted with you from the moment you were born. For him to deny that now is not just a lie, it's a betrayal of your mother's memory and his own feelings. As we were reviewing the documents, the bedroom door opened and Richard walked in. He froze when he saw Thomas and the witnesses, his gaze darting to the signed papers on Eleanor's lap. "Mother, what is going on here?" he demanded. "You're not well enough for legal meetings." "I'm perfectly well enough to ensure my wishes are carried out, Richard," Eleanor replied coolly, "and to address the lies you've been telling about Violet's parentage." Richard's face paled slightly. What lies? I've simply told her the truth after keeping it secret for years out of respect for Sarah. The truth. Eleanor held up the birth photos. Is this the face of a man who doubts he's the father who cuts the umbilical cord while sobbing with joy over a child he suspects isn't his? You were there, Richard. You witnessed Violet's birth and never once questioned that she was yours because there was never any reason to doubt it. Richard's expression hardened as he realized his deception was unraveling. Those photos prove nothing. Appearances can be misleading. Then perhaps this will be more convincing. Thomas interjected, removing an envelope from his briefcase. The results of a DNA paternity test conducted by an independent laboratory using samples from both you and Violet. My breath caught. Thomas had moved even faster than I'd expected, somehow obtaining samples from both of us without my knowledge. That's impossible, Richard sputtered. I never provided any sample. The coffee cup from your office, the one you were drinking from during our meeting yesterday about Eleanor's estate planning, Thomas explained calmly. And Violet's sample came from her water glass at my office, both collected with full chain of custody documentation for legal admissibility. Richard lunged for the envelope, but Thomas smoothly handed it to me instead. With shaking hands, I opened it and read the results. Probability of paternity, 99.9997%. I read aloud, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. You are my biological father, Dad. You always have been. Richard's face contorted with fury and disbelief. This is a setup. These results are fabricated. They're not, Thomas assured him. The testing was conducted by the most reputable laboratory in Boston using strict protocols. You are undeniably Violet's biological father, which I suspect you knew all along. Why would you do this? I asked, staring at the man I had once adored as a little girl. Why lie about something so fundamental? For a moment, Richard looked trapped, his eyes darting between the faces watching him. Then his expression hardened into cold resignation. The company is failing. Mother's shares are the only thing that can save it, and I knew she planned to split them between you and me. I needed full control to make the decisions necessary to recover our losses. What losses, Richard? Eleanor asked sharply. The ones from your failed side ventures, the money you've diverted for your own use. I took calculated risks to expand our holdings. Richard defended himself. Some didn't pay off, but that's business. If I had full control, I could sell off some of the underperforming properties, leverage the remaining assets for new developments. Sell off the hotels your father and I built from nothing. Eleanor shook her head in disappointment. That was never going to happen, Richard. Not while I'm alive. Which won't be much longer, Richard said coldly, causing everyone in the room to flinch. I was trying to ensure the company's survival after you're gone. Violet knows nothing about running a hotel chain. She's been playing with throw pillows in Seattle while I've kept this company afloat for decades. And yet, the company only started struggling after Grandpa died and you took over, I pointed out. According to the records I found, the Hamilton hotels were thriving until about 5 years ago, when you started taking out those personal loans. Richard turned on me, his anger palpable. You think you can waltz back in here after abandoning the family business and judge my decisions? You know nothing about what it takes to maintain a legacy like this. I know that stealing from the company to fund your lifestyle isn't the way to do it, I replied, maintaining my composure despite his increasing agitation. And I know that lying about my parentage to cut me out of my inheritance is both despicable and, as we now know, futile. Richard looked like he might explode with rage, but before he could respond, Amanda appeared in the doorway, Stephanie hovering anxiously behind her. What's going on? Why are all these people in Eleanor's room? Amanda demanded. Your husband has been caught in a lie, Eleanor informed her coldly. He claimed Violet wasn't his biological daughter in an attempt to disinherit her. We now have DNA proof confirming that was a fabrication. Amanda's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. Richard, is this true? You said you had proof. You knew about this. I asked her, though I wasn't really surprised. He told me years ago that there were doubts about your paternity, Amanda admitted, avoiding my gaze. I had no reason not to believe him. And it gave you a convenient excuse to treat me like an outsider, I concluded. My primary concern has always been Stephanie's future, Amanda said defensively, as any mother's would be. Stephanie pushed past her mother, looking horrified. Dad, how could you lie about something like that? Violet is my sister. Half-sister, Richard corrected automatically, though the correction rang hollow now. No, my sister. Stephanie insisted, moving to stand beside me in a show of solidarity that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. What you did was wrong, Dad, all of it. The lies, the loans trying to manipulate Grandma's will. Richard looked around the room, seeing nothing but condemnation in every face. His shoulders slumped slightly as he realized he had lost this battle. Fine, believe whatever you want. But when this company crumbles because decisions are being made by amateurs rather than someone with 30 years of experience, don't come crying to me. Actually, Richard, Eleanor said with remarkable strength, for someone in her condition, the only amateur in this room is you. You've nearly destroyed what your father and I built through reckless spending and poor management. Violet has proven herself as a successful businesswoman in her own right. I have every confidence she'll do a better job with Hamilton Hotels than you have. This is ridiculous, Richard sputtered. You're cutting me out of my own family's company based on a few financial missteps. No, Eleanor corrected him. I'm protecting the company from your missteps and ensuring it passes to someone who values what it represents beyond its monetary worth. Someone who inherited not just the Hamilton name, but also the Hamilton integrity, which you seem to have forgotten. So you'd rather leave everything to a daughter who ran away from her responsibilities? Richard's voice was bitter. I'm leaving the majority of shares to the granddaughter who built her own success rather than destroying what others built. Eleanor replied firmly. The decision is made, Richard. The papers are signed. It's done. For a moment, I thought Richard might continue fighting, but something in Eleanor's unwavering gaze seemed to finally penetrate his armor. With a last venomous look at me, he turned and stalked from the room, Amanda hurrying after him. Stephanie remained looking between Eleanor and me with uncertainty. I'm so sorry, Violet. I had no idea Dad was lying about you not being his daughter. I would never have treated you so coldly if I'd known. It's not your fault, I assured her, reaching out to squeeze her hand. You were just believing what your parents told you. Still, she said, I want to make it right. I want us to be real sisters again, like when I was little and used to follow you everywhere. I'd like that too, I said sincerely. Eleanor watched our exchange with satisfaction. This is what truly matters, she said softly. Family supporting each other, not tearing each other down for money or power. As the witnesses and Thomas prepared to leave, ensuring the signed will was securely in Thomas's possession, I sat beside Eleanor's bed holding her hand. Despite the emotional turmoil of the past hour, she looked more peaceful than I'd seen her since arriving. Are you okay, Grandma? I asked, concerned that the confrontation might have been too much for her. I'm better than okay, darling. She smiled. I've done what needed to be done. Now I can rest knowing the Hamilton legacy is in good hands. Your hands. I felt the weight of her trust settle on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as an honor. Whatever came next, I would face it with the strength and integrity that Eleanor had always embodied, determined to prove worthy of her faith in me. A week later, Eleanor Hamilton passed away peacefully in her sleep with me by her side. Despite the sadness of losing her, there was comfort in knowing she had put her affairs in order exactly as she wished, protecting both the company she loved and the granddaughter she believed in. The reading of the will took place in Thomas's office 3 days after the funeral. As expected, Richard was furious to learn officially that he had been removed from any controlling position in the company, receiving only a monthly stipend from the profits. Eleanor had left 70% of her shares to me, with the remaining 30% going to Stephanie, creating a partnership neither of us had anticipated, but both were determined to honor. This is an outrage, Richard fumed after Thomas finished reading the will. I'll contest it. Mother wasn't of sound mind when she made these changes. We have documented medical opinions confirming Eleanor's mental competence, Thomas replied calmly, as well as video recording of the signing with independent witnesses present. Contest if you wish, Richard, but I can assure you it will be a waste of time and money. Fine, Richard snapped, standing abruptly. Keep the damn company. Run it into the ground without me. I don't care anymore. As he stormed toward the door, I called after him. Dad, wait! He paused, turning with surprise evident on his face. It was the first time I'd called him Dad since the revelation of his lie about my parentage. What? He asked warily. Despite everything, you're still my father. I said, finding forgiveness I hadn't known I possessed. And you do have experience with the company that could be valuable. If you're willing to work with us rather than against us, there could still be a place for you at Hamilton Hotels. Not as CEO, but as an advisor without decision-making authority. Richard looked stunned by the offer. Why would you do that after what I tried to do to you? Because Grandma believed in second chances, I said simply. And because despite your flaws, you built parts of this company too. Your perspective could still be useful as long as you're willing to accept the new leadership structure. For a moment, I thought he might refuse out of pride. But something in his expression shifted a hint of the father I'd once adored peeking through the hardened businessman he'd become. I'll think about it, he said finally, which was more than I'd expected. After Richard and Amanda left, Stephanie lingered, looking uncertain. Did you mean that? About giving Dad another chance? I did, I confirmed. People make terrible mistakes, especially when they're afraid or desperate. That doesn't mean they can't change or that we can't forgive them, even while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. I've misjudged you so badly, Violet. All these years I believed what Mom and Dad said about you, abandoning the family, being selfish and ungrateful. But you're nothing like that. We've all been operating with incomplete information, I said gently. But now we have a chance to start fresh, to build something better together. I'd like that, Stephanie said sincerely. I miss having a big sister. In the weeks that followed, I took a leave of absence from my design business in Seattle to focus on learning the Hamilton Hotel operation. The company's financial situation was indeed precarious, but not beyond saving with the right leadership and strategy. Richard did eventually accept my offer of an advisory position, his expertise proving valuable once separated from his ego and financial self-interest. Our relationship remained complicated, but we found a way to work together professionally, while slowly rebuilding some semblance of a father-daughter connection. Amanda, true to her nature, filed for divorce once it became clear that Richard's financial situation had changed significantly. She had always been practical about where her interests lay, and a husband without control of the family fortune held little appeal for her. Stephanie moved into the main house with me after finishing her semester at Harvard, throwing herself into learning the hotel business with enthusiasm I hadn't expected. Her natural charm and social media savvy brought a fresh perspective to our marketing efforts, attracting a younger demographic we'd previously struggled to reach. Over the next year, we restructured the company's debt, sold one underperforming property to strengthen the others, and implemented a comprehensive rebranding that honored the Hamilton tradition while embracing modern hospitality trends. My background in boutique hotel design proved unexpectedly valuable, allowing us to update the properties without losing their unique character. The most meaningful project, however, was establishing the Eleanor Hamilton Scholarship Fund for young women pursuing careers in hospitality management. It felt like the perfect way to honor my grandmother's legacy while creating opportunities for the next generation. My healing journey wasn't easy. There were days when the pain of Richard's betrayal and the loss of Eleanor felt overwhelming. But I found strength in unexpected places, in Stephanie's growing confidence and affection, in the loyal Hamilton employees who embraced our new vision, and in my own resilience that Eleanor had always seen in me. I still kept my design business in Seattle, traveling back regularly to check in, unwilling to abandon the independence I had worked so hard to build. But Boston no longer felt like a place to escape from. Instead, it had become a second home again, a place where I was reclaiming my heritage while creating something new. On the one-year anniversary of Eleanor's passing, I sat alone in her garden, now blooming with spring flowers. I held the last birthday card she had sent me before falling ill, her elegant handwriting conveying wisdom that had taken on new meaning after everything that had happened. The truest strength isn't found in power or money, my darling, but in knowing who you are and standing firm in that knowledge, even when others try to shake your foundation. Richard had tried to erase my identity with his lie, but in doing so, he had inadvertently forced me to discover just how firmly rooted that identity truly was. I was Violet Hamilton, daughter of Sarah, granddaughter of Eleanor businesswoman, designer sister, And yes, daughter of Richard too, despite his flaws. Sometimes our deepest wounds open doors to our strongest selves, a version that would make Eleanor proud, a version I was still discovering every day. Have you ever had to stand firm in your truth when someone tried to rewrite your story? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their identity can't be taken away by someone else's lies. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that sometimes the family we build can be even stronger than the one we're born into.